We know Donald Trump is all about the art of the deal. This meeting that's due to happen soon, we're told, between President Putin and President Trump. How can you make a deal when one of the players is not at a table? What do you make of it?
So we're seeing a bit of a pattern here, I think. If you look at both Gaza and Ukraine, the U.S. is really moving unilaterally. In the case of the Gaza Strip, there was no involvement of the Palestinians. In the case of Ukraine, there's now two constituencies that are really missing at the table, one of which are, of course, the Ukrainians, maybe not missing entirely, according to Trump, and his cabinet members and the National Security Advisor, but certainly the European Union or the European allies are missing almost entirely, and that seems to be deliberate.
President Trump says he wants to hear what the Russian president has to say. He wants to find out whether he actually is prepared for a peace deal. I mean, what does President Putin want? What would encourage him to sign a peace deal?
That's really unclear to me at this point, Lorna. Putin has had these sort of larger involvements for quite some time. Thinks that that Russia should enlarge its sphere of influence, and the wars, both with respect to Georgia and Ukraine, that he's led in the past decades, are clear evidence of that.
And then looking at it from Ukraine's perspective, what leverage does President Trump have over Ukraine in order to encourage them, should there be any deal on the table?
So the Ukraine is clearly dependent on foreign aid, military aid and economic aid, both now and for the foreseeable future. And that's exactly the card Donald Trump is playing. And he does it in almost like a business type deal fashion. We've seen this from him in the past. The U.S. administration has floated an sort of business approach with respect to oil, gas, and rare earths, as you said before, and that's become a real problem.
Let's talk about the European leaders then and their position in it. I think you'll agree that they were rather stunned when those comments came from the special envoy or counsel from America saying, no, they wouldn't be at the table, because many of those European countries have spent millions and millions helping Ukraine.
Yeah, it's a real conundrum in some ways, because Donald Trump, there's sort of two ways to think about this. Donald Trump clearly sees the European no longer as a close ally at this point, but potentially a geopolitical and geoeconomic adversary. We see this with respect to the tariffs that he's put in place or planning to put in place, but also here. So there's a benign version or interpretation, if you will, one which basically says, well, this is just Europe being weak, so we need to go it alone, or it's really an attempt to weaken European allies or European partners much more so in order to become the hegemon or be the powerful player around the world, if you will.
I wonder if it partly comes from Trump's stance that he thinks these European countries should be investing much more in defence. It's been something he's talked about several times.
That's true. And I think if you look at the countries that have upped, if you will, the military spending over the last 10 years since Trump won, and certainly since the renewed invasion, if you will, of Ukraine in 2022, countries have reacted. They just haven't reacted potentially as quickly as Trump would like that to be the case. But the reaction is there. The military aid given by European countries equals or surpasses that of the United States at this point.
Talking of spending on defence, the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has just said in the UK, and it's a change of policy from the Labour leader, that he would be happy to commit some of his forces to a peacekeeping mission, should there be a peace deal. Countries these days are very reluctant to put boots on the ground in another country. What do you make of Keir Starmer's words?
Realistically, it's a necessity, if you will, because Ukraine is not going to rely or trust any announcements made by Russia. So you would have to have some kind of buffer in between Russian forces and Ukrainian forces, wherever that line may be, whether it's the old border lines that existed prior to 2014 or somewhere between what we have now or the current demarcation line. That said, very few countries are willing to go to that length. The United States certainly isn't at this point, but I really think the European countries will likely have to step up because it really is their security that's on the line here.
Just briefly, I mean, I mentioned that there's this emergency meeting, the convening of about 10 European countries. What can they possibly achieve in that?
I think the only thing that can realistically be achieved is a clear show of unity for Ukraine and trying to pull the US closer to its own position to portray a signal of strength towards who's really the adversary, if you will, or the other side in these negotiations, which is Russia.
Very interesting to talk to you. Marcus Wagner, thank you very much.
Thank you.